Witam, Tomasz Wróblewski, to jest Wolność w Remoncie. Dziś to niecodzienne wydanie, będzie po angielsku z naszym specjalnym gościem, dyplomatą, ambasadorem Millerem. Hello Terry.
Hi, how are you, Thomas?
Really nice to see you here. Terry jest wieloletnim bojownikiem o wolny rynek, dyrektor dwóch ośrodków badawczych Heritage Foundation. Terry nadzoruje modelowanie i statystyczne, ekonometryczne badania i zajmuje się przygotowaniem indeksu wolności Heritage Foundation. Jedna z ważniejszych publikacji. Warsaw Enterprise Institute jest partnerem i bardzo nam miło gościć teraz Terry'ego w naszym studio. Był ambasadorem. Co dla mnie też istotne, Terry Miller jest absolwentem teksańskiej uczelni, tak jak ja, także mój kolega nie ze studiów, ale przynajmniej z tej samej uczelni. Terry, let me start with a basic question everybody asks. What's the freedom mean today? What does it mean in a world which is divided between populist, nationalist, liberal democracy, nationalistic, social democracy? Has any meaning whatsoever still?
Oh, I think freedom is perhaps the most important concept that we have in the whole international system today. Countries have been moving almost inexorably towards greater freedom. We've seen that in our index of economic freedom. We see it in the political freedom as countries throw off the shackles that they have been suffering under from other countries, from either occupation or other controls that are placed on. And there's really a worldwide movement towards greater freedom. For individuals, I think freedom has everything to do with your ability to make decisions for yourself. That means taking responsibility for yourself as well, but it means you can decide things, fundamental things, where to work, where to live.
What's a picture of the freedom in the world coming out of your index?
The picture is that freedom is increasing. We look at the relationship between individuals and governments because to be governed is in some ways to be giving up your freedom or to have lost your freedom. So the idea of enhancing freedom means you have to look at the relationship between the person and the government. And we want more of the power and more of the decision-making to be vested in the individual.
At the same time, we have Venezuela, we have China, we have Russia, we have countries all over the world struggling, and people are still either in slavery or at least have democracies.
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right. The struggle for freedom is a never-ending struggle. You can't stop, even if you're in an advanced country with high levels of freedom. You need to fight to defend that all the time. You talked about China and Russia. I think if you look in the long run, people in those countries have substantially more freedom now than they had 50 or 100 years ago. Perhaps there have been some short-term losses and a lot more to be done in the future. But I think if you look over the course of recent human history, it's a positive story.
Okay, more freedom. Okay, we could agree with that. It's just, but talk a little about. We just had a President Trump in Europe, and it's still we can see a vivid, growing rift between our continents, and it's not just the rhetorics; it's also the values. Tax system, healthcare system, immigration policy, state involvement in economics, and immigration most of all. I mean, it looks like those are two separate continents with different values nowadays.
I think of those issues you mentioned, taxes, immigration, social policies, as rather superficial indicators, actually, of our societies. If you look a little bit deeper, I think you find that our cultures rest on fantastic similarities. We respect and practice democracy. We believe in human rights. There's a whole cultural background that the countries in Europe, the United States, countries really now being adopted throughout the world. These practices that come from Western cultural traditions, and I think that it's very strong foundation on which friendships between countries like Poland and America are built. And I think if we have some differences in tax policy or immigration policy, that's something that will be worked out in the short run.
We just have 100 years of establishing diplomatic relationship between the U.S. and Poland. That's my little pin indicating this. But still, we may have a strong foundation, but we are practically in the war, Terry. Europe and the United States are in a trade war. So how can you be talking about getting closer where we are really more and more far apart?
Oh, you scared me there for a minute talking about war. I was afraid I'd missed something. People talk about a trade war, but really there's massive amounts of trade between the people of the United States and the people of Europe. And this is a huge part of the prosperity that we've built both here in Europe and in America. And yes, we've got some talks about new tariffs or new restrictions on one side or the other. But again, this is on a foundation of a system through the World Trade Organization and just through the free market system in which trade, the levels of trade are very large. These tariffs will affect a very small portion of that. So I think it's probably an exaggeration to be talking about a war. We're having a very minor skirmish at this point, I would say.
So you're saying we're pretty much leveling the field, but isn't it a danger that this could actually escalate into open trade war?
I agree. It could escalate, and that would be very damaging to the people of Poland and Europe and also to the people of the United States.
United States imposes those sanctions.
Well, if the United States imposes the sanctions, in many cases, we're sanctioning our own people. At that point, it's widely misunderstood, I think, in economics and trade. But when a country like the United States puts tariffs on products from Europe, what we're doing is taxing American citizens and forcing ourselves to pay more for those products from Europe. So the initial harm happens to the country that puts the tariffs in place. It's a very strange way to do business, actually.
So you think that at one point Americans would force the U.S. government, President Trump, to actually back off from the sanctions, or first we'll see some or Chinese or Europeans stepping back, looking for compromise?
I think the American public is very concerned. We're having a very vigorous policy debate in the United States that both among the people of the country and within the Congress and within the administration even about what the proper trade policy should be for America. President Trump has been rather aggressive in changing those policies, making them tougher, if you will. And the goal, I think, is to affect behavior in countries like China, which has acted not always in the most honorable way in terms of international economic relations.
Index of Economic Freedom, you're doing it for 26 years?
24 years.
24 years, yeah. Okay. But still, like comparing what happening 24 years and now, do you see any indications of something we shall worry about the future of the freedom, anything that would come out? Or if not, what will be the red light we should look for in the index?
Well, it depends on countries' levels of development. Overall, the prospects have been good. Freedom's been increasing. People's incomes and national gross domestic products have been increasing.
This is what you say in a
This is what we find.
affluent people are, and more freedom, they're more affluent.
Absolutely. That's what the data shows. The greater freedom, the greater prospects for prosperity, for all kinds of social benefits in society. Countries that are freer have better social indicators. They have better health care. They do a better job of protecting the environment. And of course, people have much higher incomes in the freer societies. So why would you want to do anything else? I would say there are some problems. We see countries that backslide. A country like Venezuela that was once one of the most prosperous in the world, but has adopted some horribly repressive socialist kinds of policies and basically destroyed their economy. And the people there are living in quite desperate situations right now. So countries can make a wrong turn and things can go very wrong very fast. But if countries will uphold the principles of freedom, both political freedom and economic freedom, the future can be very bright.
I don't know any politician, any leader who would say he imposes some restriction of their own nation because he wants them to have less freedom. It's always done in the name of freedom. But some of those regulations are really tricky. Polish government assumes that the only way to build prosperity of our society and to build up our companies and strengthen our companies is to supply them with a lot of capital. And the only source could be a public money going into some private or state-owned companies, so they would be better off and could compete in the West. So we wouldn't call it nationalization, but more companies have state as a co-owner or investor. And so for a small country with relatively young democracy and young capitalism, is it a way really that the state should get involved and strengthen the company to allow them to compete better with German, French, other companies?
I think that's a very limited approach to the free market and capitalism. The government, like the government of Poland, does have some resources, so they could do some of what you describe in terms of investing, but the international economic system has massive amounts of capital, billions, trillions of dollars worth of capital that are available for investment in places like Poland, can create good jobs here.
It wouldn't be a dependence. It wouldn't create other dependence from other capital, other countries and other governments.
Well, that's what competition is about. We're not talking about other governments either. We're talking about private firms, private banks, private individuals investing. And if you're an open society, you have those people coming from all over the place. You'll have Americans, French, Germans. Who knows where people will come from that want to invest in Poland, because this could be a very good place to do business.
For those who are free, money will always come.
Absolutely.
Okay. One issue which is relating to the U.S., if you could help also our viewers and listeners, there's a new movement, walk away movement in the United States. Some people are coming up in front of YouTube, their own telephones. They say they walk away from Democratic Party. They're tired of political correctness. What is it about?
We're having very loud debates in the United States right now about our political system and also about our economic system. And I think that's part of what a healthy democracy does. You encourage those debates. There's been somewhat of a radicalization of positions of our two main political parties. I think it's probably true that the Democrats have moved increasingly to the left and the Republicans perhaps to the right. We don't quite have the center in the same way that we did in the past, and we're struggling to identify what that center is for the future. And that's why in our elections, sometimes it'll go one direction, the next time it goes the other direction. So the American people are searching for the proper way ahead, as long as it's rooted in the fundamental values, democracy, respect for human rights, respect for freedom. Those are reflected in our Constitution, and there aren't very many people in the United States that want to change that.
This shift now we have a strongly conservative way, and President Donald Trump, and we hear a lot of criticism also from Polish mainstream media. But the question: how is it affecting economy? What Donald Trump did so far?
Well, so far, the results are very good. We've had rather significant tax reform, a tax reduction in the United States.
It was the biggest in the history, probably, isn't it? Like from Ronald Reagan.
In nominal terms,
yeah.
Yes, I think that's right. That's really because our economy is much bigger now.
Right.
But it was a significant tax cut. And also a reshuffling of the tax provisions, so less tax is put on job-creating things like business investment. So we're trying to encourage more investment, more job creation. I think that's been very successful. Another set of policies were those that looked at the regulatory environment in the United States, particularly in areas like energy, in some cases to the environment, where there had been a bit of overreach perhaps in the past, and
very costly for businesses.
Very costly for businesses and individuals. And so we've stepped back a little bit from that, and I think that's having a very positive effect on investment and job creation. Again, the one area where I have some concern is trade policy, because I think that's going in the other direction. There's more regulation, more interference with the freedom of Americans to trade or undertake whatever economic activity they want. And that has the potential to undercut some of the benefits of these other policies.
Okay, you came to Poland. Obviously, you speak a lot about the United States. Poles are eager to hear about Donald Trump, especially from famous conservative think tank like yours. But also, since you are here, you're watching us in Poland and Polish transformation we are going through. And a question you were probably asked several times about Polish judicial system and this experimental reform that brings a lot of controversy, not just in Poland, but also European Union and discussion, and whether we still have a democracy, whether we have the freedom. And what's your assessment so far from what you see from this discussion around the Polish judicial reform?
Well, let's not talk about whether you still have a democracy. I think that's absolutely clear. Yeah. In fact, you wouldn't be having this debate if you didn't have a democracy. So certainly we look with concern when we see something happening in a country that has a lot of its citizens concerned. Well, that's of concern to people in the international community as well. I'm pretty confident that the Polish people will find a way to resolve this issue and come out with a system that is satisfactory for the Polish people in terms of their culture, their history, and what kind of society you want to have going forward. I would be much more concerned if I thought there was some fundamental threat to democracy or human rights here at this time, but I don't see that. When I look at Poland, this is only my second visit to Poland, but of course I followed Polish history when I was younger and saw the struggles of the Polish people to get to this point where you have rather good levels, certainly high levels of political freedom, pretty good levels of economic freedom. It's a remarkable record of progress. And I don't see something like this judicial issue. Yes, it's of concern, but it's not, doesn't seem from the outside at least to be a fundamental threat to Poland.
Your Index of Economic Freedom also assess judicial system.
Yes.
And then can this, you call it debate, some others call it threat. You also has but yes, you're right, it's mostly so far a debate. Could this affect the index, our position. Polish government, opinion makers are very sensitive, not just to your index, but it's one of the most important next to World Bank doing business. But you perceive this as a threat for index?
I do. I think it could definitely affect the index. One of the main things we look at is the independence of the judiciary and the effectiveness of the judicial system. And if this move by the government is indeed a move to take away some of the independence of the judiciary, then that would show up as a negative factor in our index. So that's really why we're concerned and why we're watching so carefully.
Well, just to close our remarks, what Ronald Reagan would say about today's world?
I think Ronald Reagan would be thrilled when he looks at what's happened in Eastern Europe and the countries of the former Soviet Union. Reagan became president at a time where there was an Iron Curtain dividing Europe and millions of people living under more repressive communist regimes. Most of that has been wiped away. Yes, there are remnants of it, but I think President Reagan would be absolutely thrilled at the human progress, both politically and economically, that's taken place in a country like Poland.
Jak słyszeliście Państwo, coś co może nieczęsto zdarza się w naszej debacie, mnóstwo optymizmu, a przede wszystkim perspektywa pana ambasadora z lat, jeszcze z czasów zimnej wojny, która pozwala zupełnie inaczej spojrzeć na naszą debatę, dyskusję, problemy, które się oczywiście pojawiają, ale niekoniecznie muszą być nawet zauważone w indeksie wolności, bo Polska jak najbardziej pozostaje demokracją i krajem wolnym. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And I hope to see you soon in democratic Poland.
Exactly.
Thank you. Dziękujemy bardzo i zapraszamy na kolejny odcinek Wolności w Remoncie, kanał YouTube Warsaw Enterprise Institute, a wersja audio w podcastach iTunes.